An HOA officer tossed an unarmed man in front of his pregnant wife during a peaceful neighborhood walk. He thought his vest gave him power to bully anyone without consequences. But he didn't know the man he attacked was a police commissioner with the law and entire force behind him. Just wait until you see how this shocking confrontation unfolds and why justice hit back harder than anyone expected. It was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday, the kind where sunshine warms your skin and the world feels calm for a moment. Marcus Chin, the city's respected police commissioner, had finally found time for a quiet walk with his pregnant wife Elena. Her due date was just a month away, and though she felt tired these days, she insisted on walking to help with her back pain and get some fresh air. They strolled past neat houses and trimmed gardens, past neighbors they recognized with friendly waves but barely knew by name. Elena walked slowly, one hand resting on her round belly, the other holding Marcus's arm. There was nothing special about this walk until they crossed an invisible line that separated the public sidewalk from the HOA-controlled part of the neighborhood. That's when he appeared. James Fuller stepped out from his driveway like he was guarding a high-security facility. He wore a khaki vest with HOA security stitched across the chest, mirrored sunglasses that hid his eyes, and a black taser hanging from his belt. James acted like he was the law in these parts, not realizing he was about to confront the actual law. "Hey!" James called out sharply, marching toward them with his chest puffed out. "Where's your visitor pass?" Marcus turned slowly, still supporting Elena with one arm. "We live here," he said calmly. "Just taking a walk with my wife." James didn't even blink. "I asked where your pass is. Everyone needs identification in this section." Elena shifted uncomfortably beside Marcus. The baby kicked and she placed a hand on her stomach to soothe it. Marcus kept his voice even, trying to defuse the situation. "Sir, we're just trying to walk. My wife is 8 months pregnant and needs her exercise." That's when James reached for his taser. The movement was quick, deliberate, practiced. "Don't do this," Marcus warned, raising his hand in caution. "You're making a serious mistake." But James had already made his decision. There was a click, a burst of electrical sound, and before Marcus could finish his sentence, the taser's prongs hit his chest, sending 50,000 volts ripping through his body. Elena screamed as Marcus collapsed onto the pavement. His body seized, face twisted in pain, limbs rigid and trembling. Though the physical pain was intense, blinding even, what burned more than electricity was the humiliation. The utter disbelief that he, the city's top law enforcement officer, had just been assaulted in front of his pregnant wife by a man who thought a plastic badge gave him authority. Elena stumbled toward her husband, dropping carefully to her knees despite her pregnant belly, reaching out with shaking hands. "Stop moving." James snapped at her as if she was the threat, as if this situation wasn't already spinning wildly out of control. Marcus's eyes rolled, his muscles twitching as the shock faded into a throbbing burn across his chest. But he didn't cry out. He clenched his jaw and stared up at the man who had just humiliated him in front of his wife and unborn child. In that moment, something quiet and irreversible snapped inside him, not from pain but from violation. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a line being crossed, and it would be the last time anyone crossed it without facing consequences. The neighborhood seemed frozen in shocked silence, but within seconds doors cracked open. Windows lifted. A trickle of curious neighbors became a crowd as people shuffled over driveways and onto the sidewalk, drawn by Elena's scream and the crack of the taser. Some watched in stunned disbelief. Others raised their phones, recording every detail with trembling hands. Then came the voices of recognition. "Oh my God. Is that Commissioner Chin? You tossed Police Commissioner Chin? Are you out of your mind? Hey. Someone call 911. But it was too late. The damage was done, captured forever by dozens of camera phones. What James Fuller didn't know was that his act of power would soon become his greatest regret. Elena knelt beside her husband, her body shaking with sobs. One arm cradled her belly protectively while the other hovered over Marcus's face, afraid to touch him, afraid to hurt him more. Tears streaked her cheeks as she whispered, more prayer than words, "Please be okay. Please don't let anything happen to the baby. Just keep breathing." She wasn't crying like a woman frightened, she was crying like a woman breaking apart from the inside. Marcus lay on the concrete, chest rising and falling unevenly, face tight with pain. The taser wires still hung from his shirt, one electrode twitching against the ground. His jaw remained clenched, his lips pale, but his eyes never left Elena's. They stayed focused, calm in a way that was more terrifying than the chaos around them. He didn't rage, didn't thrash. His fingers twitched, and then his right hand lifted slightly off the pavement. He didn't point at anyone, didn't raise his voice, but his words cut through the air like steel. "Don't touch her," he said, voice low but steady. "Back away from my wife." It wasn't a request. It was an order, one that commanded more authority than any plastic badge or security vest ever could. James hesitated for just a second. Then, with obvious contempt, he stepped forward, not toward Elena but toward the taser wires. With a deliberate stomp, he pinned the electrode under his boot and ripped it from Marcus's body with the same care someone might use to tear out a weed. No apology. No pause. Just a man desperately trying to reclaim control in a situation he'd already lost. Marcus didn't flinch at the pain. He barely reacted. But inside him, something had ignited, not anger, something slower and more focused. A flame that burned not with rage but with precision, a fire that knew exactly where to go and what to do. James thought he had tossed just another resident, someone who would be too afraid to fight back. What he had done, what all these witnesses had just watched, was attack the very person who commanded the city's entire police force. And Marcus Chin, still lying in the middle of the street surrounded by gasping neighbors and recording phones, felt none of the weakness his body suggested. He felt something else entirely: purpose. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had called 911 and response time in this neighborhood was always quick. But it would be even quicker when dispatch realized who was down. 2 patrol cars screeched to a halt at the end of the street. 4 officers rushed out, equipment rattling. When they saw who was on the ground, their expressions shifted from professional concern to personal outrage. "Commissioner?" The first officer dropped to one knee beside Marcus. "Sir, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Rodriguez," Marcus managed, his voice steadier than it had any right to be. "Take care of my wife first." The young officer nodded and turned his attention to Elena, helping her to a nearby bench while his partners assessed the situation. The 4th officer approached James, who suddenly looked much smaller without his victim on the ground. "Sir, I need you to step back and keep your hands where I can see them." James puffed up again. "I'm HOA security. This man was trespassing." "Sir," the officer cut him off coldly, "you just assaulted the police commissioner of this city. Put your hands behind your back. Now." By evening, Marcus was home from the hospital. The doctors had monitored his heart rhythm, checked for any lasting damage from the electrical shock, and confirmed that despite the assault, his vitals were stable. Elena had been examined too. Both she and the baby were physically unharmed, though her blood pressure had spiked dangerously during the incident. Marcus sat in his home office, still sore, still bruised, but utterly focused. He didn't waste time raging about what had happened. He didn't rant on social media or call reporters. Instead, he made quiet phone calls, sent precise emails, and set the system in motion with surgical precision. As police commissioner, Marcus had built his career on fairness and accountability, principles that applied to everyone, including his own officers. Now, he applied that same methodical approach to James Fuller and the HOA that had armed him. First, he contacted Internal Affairs to ensure his personal connection to the case wouldn't compromise the investigation. Then he arranged for every piece of evidence to be collected properly. Surveillance footage from nearby homes, witness statements from neighbors, medical reports documenting his injuries and Elena's distress. "Sir, you should be resting," his assistant said when she brought him the preliminary reports. "I'll rest when this is done," Marcus replied, not looking up from his computer. What Marcus discovered next made his blood run cold. James Fuller wasn't just an overzealous HOA officer. He had a history. 2 previous complaints had been filed against him, both quietly dismissed by the HOA board. In one, he had followed a teenage boy home, screaming accusations about vandalism that never happened. In another, he had threatened a mother and her young daughter with his taser for loitering on their own lawn after dark. No formal disciplinary action had followed either incident. Just warnings, notes in a drawer, problems swept under a rug. But that was before James tossed the pregnant wife of the city's police commissioner. By midnight, Marcus had compiled enough evidence to justify a formal criminal investigation. He wasn't building a case just against James Fuller. He was building one against an entire broken system of unchecked authority and neglected oversight. And when the wheels of justice started turning, nothing would stop them. Within days, the incident had grown far beyond a simple assault case. What began as one man with a taser had exposed cracks in the very foundation of the neighborhood's governance. Marcus authorized a special task force, not to receive special treatment, but to ensure the investigation was thorough and unbiased. Led by Lieutenant Sarah Patel, The team began examining the HOA's operations with the same scrutiny they would apply to any organization under investigation. What they uncovered was troubling. The HOA had been operating as its own fiefdom, with minimal oversight and maximum control. Financial records showed inflated maintenance fees, suspicious contracts with companies owned by board members' relatives, and a pattern of excessive fines that seemed designed to fill the association's discretionary budget rather than improve the community. "Commissioner, this goes deeper than we thought," Lieutenant Patel reported during their daily briefing. "Fuller wasn't just a bad apple, he was a symptom of a corrupt system." Marcus nodded, unsurprised. "How many residents have been affected?" "At least 60 households have paid questionable fines in the past year alone. Some have even been forced to sell their homes after being unable to pay accumulated penalties." The news spread quickly through the neighborhood. Residents who had long suffered in silence began coming forward with their stories. The elderly couple who'd been fined $500 for planting unauthorized flowers. The single mother hit with daily penalties because her work schedule prevented her from repainting her fence on the HOA's timeline. The immigrant family threatened with eviction because their cultural decorations violated aesthetic standards. Elena, despite her condition, became a rallying point. From their living room, she helped organize residents' meetings where people could share their experiences and coordinate their response. "This isn't about revenge," she told a group of neighbors gathered in their home. "This is about making sure no one else gets hurt or bullied. This is about building the kind of community we actually want to live in." The media caught wind of the story. At first it was local news, police commissioner tossed by HOA security, but as details of the broader corruption emerged, national outlets picked it up. The case became a symbol of unchecked power, of what happens when authority operates without accountability. The county courthouse was packed on the morning of James Fuller's hearing. Every seat was filled, with reporters lining the back wall and residents from the neighborhood sitting shoulder to shoulder, united by their desire to see justice done. James sat at the defendant's table, his HOA vest exchanged for an ill-fitting suit that seemed to hang off his diminished frame. His attorney, a court-appointed public defender, shuffled papers nervously. The charges were serious: assault with a dangerous weapon, excessive use of force, and causing bodily harm to a pregnant woman's spouse. When asked to explain his actions, James defaulted to the same tired line: "I was following protocol." He didn't show a resident badge. "I was maintaining security." But the words sounded hollow even to him. They collapsed under questioning. Protocol didn't authorize tasering unarmed residents. Protocol didn't explain why he stomped on the electrode after Marcus was down. Protocol couldn't account for the smirk one neighbor had captured in a still frame right after he pulled the trigger. Then Marcus took the stand. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't perform for the audience. He simply opened the folder before him and began to speak calmly, methodically, as he had done countless times in police briefings and city council meetings. Section 39-13-101 of our state code defines assault as causing bodily injury to another knowingly or recklessly, he began. Mr. Fuller didn't just violate HOA guidelines that day. He violated state law. Marcus detailed the events with clinical precision. The unprovoked escalation. The failure to identify himself properly. The immediate jump to potentially lethal force against an unarmed man with a visibly pregnant wife. He cited medical reports, psychological assessments, and the testimony of witnesses. He never looked at James during his statement. He didn't need to. Every word built a wall between himself and the man who had stood over him with a weapon. Every fact, every exhibit, every argument was another brick in a structure labeled consequence. By the time Marcus closed his folder, the courtroom was silent. James didn't look defiant anymore. He looked small, diminished, a man who'd thought he understood power until real power walked into the room, not shouting, not threatening, just naming the law and letting it speak for itself. The verdict came quickly. James Fuller was found guilty on all counts, sentenced to 18 months in prison with mandatory anger management and ethics training upon release. But the impact of the case extended far beyond one man's punishment. The HOA board members found themselves under investigation too. 3 resigned before they could be formally charged, and 2 faced prosecution for financial misconduct. The neighborhood's management structure collapsed like a house of cards, revealing years of abuse hiding behind printed bylaws and manufactured authority. Within weeks, state lawmakers took notice. What had begun as a local incident now demanded policy response. A bipartisan bill was drafted and quickly gained support, the Chin-Fuller Act, as it came to be known. The legislation mandated strict oversight for all HOAs, required training and certification for security personnel, prohibited the use of weapons by HOA officers, and established a state ombudsman to handle resident complaints. This isn't about one neighborhood, State Senator Williams said during the floor debate. This is about ensuring that nobody's rights stop at the entrance to their subdivision. Meanwhile, the community itself was healing. With the old HOA dissolved, residents began rebuilding from scratch. They elected a diverse board that included young families, seniors, and representatives from every street. They rewrote the bylaws to emphasize community support rather than punitive enforcement. Maintenance fees were reduced to cover only necessary expenses, with transparent accounting accessible to all homeowners. Marcus didn't run for the board or seek any formal role in the new structure. His job was demanding enough, and with Elena's due date approaching, his priorities were clear. But his influence was undeniable. The principles he had championed throughout his career, accountability, fairness, transparency, became the foundation of the new community governance. Most meaningful was the shift in how neighbors interacted. People who had lived side by side for years without speaking began introducing themselves. Community cookouts replaced citation notices. Children played freely on lawns that once had been off-limits. The fences between yards felt metaphorically lower, even if their physical height remained unchanged. 1 month after the trial, on a warm summer evening, Elena gave birth to a healthy baby girl. They named her Sophia, after Marcus's grandmother, who had taught him that true strength came not from power over others but from standing firm in your principles. The birth announcement spread through the neighborhood like a wave of joy. Cards and small gifts appeared on their porch. Meals were delivered without fanfare. It was as if the entire community wanted to share in this moment of new beginning, this symbol of life continuing despite the trauma they had all experienced. One evening, as the sun was setting, Marcus sat on their back porch with Sophia sleeping peacefully against his chest. Elena joined him, bringing 2 cups of tea. The garden was quiet except for the distant sound of children playing somewhere down the street. "The neighbors want to throw a welcome party for Sophia next weekend," Elena said softly, careful not to wake the baby. "I told them we'd think about it." Marcus nodded, his eyes on the horizon. "We should go. It would be good for everyone." Elena studied her husband's face. The incident had changed him, not in the fundamental ways, not in his core beliefs or his commitment to justice, but in subtle shifts of perspective. He seemed more aware of the fragility of peace, more conscious of how quickly authority could become abuse. "Do you think things will stay this way?" she asked after a moment. "Or will we just end up with another system that gets corrupted over time?" Marcus considered the question carefully, his fingers gently stroking Sophia's tiny back. "Systems are only as good as the people who run them," he finally answered. "What happened to us? It woke people up. Made them realize they can't just hand over control and stop paying attention. That's the real change, and I think it might last." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. There would be challenges ahead, of course. The law wasn't perfect. The community would face disagreements. Marcus's job would continue to demand difficult decisions and careful balancing of power. But something fundamental had shifted in their neighborhood, in their city, and perhaps beyond. Not because a police commissioner had been wronged, but because that wrong had been answered not with vengeance but with justice, methodical, measured, and ultimately transformative. As darkness settled around them, Marcus looked down at his sleeping daughter and made a silent promise. The world she grew up in would be one where power served people, not the other way around. It was a promise he had made many times before in his career, but never had it felt so personal, so vital, so within reach. The neighborhood was quiet now, but it was the right kind of quiet. The kind built on trust rather than fear, on connection rather than control. The kind worth protecting.